first of all, both of us obviously love pins and brooches and the stories that they tell. And let's start with the pin that you're wearing today.
Well, it actually does relate to what we were talking about, the fascism book. So what happened, as I mentioned, I was in London all during World War II, and my father was broadcast over BBC into Czechoslovakia. I was a little girl, and I actually thought he was in the radio when I heard him speaking. But the thing that I did know was that every broadcast on BBC would open with notes from Beethoven's Fifth with kettle drums, da 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 dum, and it was in Morse code, V for victory. And so that's why I'm wearing this pin, because I wore it while we were doing a lot of the fascism stuff.
Wow. Well, another pin I know you wear in connection with your book, because when I heard you speak at the Chicago Council on Foreign Relations, you were wearing a pin of the god Mercury. And maybe you can tell our audience why you wore that pin.
Well, because I saw Mercury as Mercury the messenger, and what that book about was a message was that I was delivering in terms of that we need to pay attention to what was going on. But it's fun to think about what pins to wear. It takes all day.
It's and then you also have to wear something that will show that particular pin, because not all outfits go with all pins.
Definitely, very
So it definitely
complicated.
adds to the time of getting ready. So
Right.
how did you get first interested in pins? Was it as an just because they're pretty accessories, or did you always use them as a message
Now,
delivery
I mean,
system?
I clearly like jewelry, and I do have some pins that I inherited from my family. But what really did happen, and I did wear them because I thought they were pretty. But when I went to the United Nations, I was what is known as an instructed ambassador, getting my instructions from Washington about what one needed to do. And it was at the end of the Gulf War. And the ceasefire had been translated into a series of sanctions resolutions. And my instructions were to make sure the sanctions stayed on. So I said perfectly terrible things about Saddam Hussein constantly. And so all of a sudden, a poem appeared in the papers in Baghdad comparing me to many things, but among them, an unparalleled serpent. So I happened to have a snake pin, and I decided to wear it when I talked about Saddam Hussein and Iraq. So all of a sudden, this poem, as I said, compared me to many things, but among them this unparalleled serpent. So what happened was then, I think you know that at the end of meetings, usually the ambassadors go out and there's a gaggle of press, and they picked up the fact that I was wearing this pin, and they asked me why, and so I said because Saddam Hussein compared me to an unparalleled serpent. And then I thought, well, this is fun. And I was in New York, and I went out and I bought a lot of costume jewelry to depict what I thought we were going to do on any given day. So on good days, I wore flowers and butterflies and balloons. And on bad days, I wore carnivorous animals and spiders and things. And the other ambassadors noticed. And if you remember, President Bush had said, read my lips, no new
Yes.
taxes.
Yes.
So I then said, read my pins. And that's how it started. And I had so much fun with it. So, for instance, the other ambassadors did get used to it in some way. But then when I became Secretary of State, the Russians were uh, spying on the State Department. And so we found the guy. Sitting outside listening to the things that we were doing. So we did what diplomats do, which is demarche Moscow and say, don't do that. But the next time I met Primakov, who was my counterpart, the Russian foreign minister, I wore this huge bug, and he knew exactly what I
Oh,
was doing. So I've had a lot of fun with it, and but I have to say this, and you and I were talking about the tiny jewel box where you have bought pins. So when there was a period where my name was being mentioned for Secretary of State, but I really didn't think it was going to happen. But I went to the tiny jewel box and they showed me this glorious eagle that was an antique, but it was fairly steep in price. And I thought to myself, on the off chance that I get to be Secretary of State, I'm going to go and buy that eagle. And so I did get to be Secretary of State, and I wore it as I was being sworn in. So I'm in the Oval Office holding the Bible with my hand up, and I look, and this pin is just kind of waving around. And all I, instead of, swearing my allegiance, I thought this pin is going to fall off. And it was an antique, and I hadn't kind of bothered to fasten it properly. So
Whoa.
that's my Secretary of State pin. But there's so many fun stories about it, and they are in that book. And my whole point is to try to make foreign policy less foreign with the various stories that go with the pins.
Well, I, of course, have adored the book since it came out and highly recommend it to anyone interested in either diplomacy, your sense of humor, or the beauty of pins and their messages. And since you mentioned the tiny jewel box, the pin I'm wearing today comes from there. And it isn't a message pin, which is what I've been wearing since 2017 when I went on MSNBC. But it is just a pretty pin. But it does have a history because it's the pin that I wore by chance the day that I cross-examined Rosemary Woods in the office adjacent to the Oval Office. And so it has a very special meaning to me, and I'm thrilled to be wearing it. But do you have a favorite pin? Is there something that you just
Well, I have
love?
actually two favorite pins. One is at this ceramic heart that my daughter made when she was in grade school. So I say it, my daughter made it, and they said, "Well, how old is your daughter?" And she's like 50. And so Katie says to me, "You've got to tell him I made it when I was a child." So that's one. The other one is what I call my Katrina pin. And um, I went to New Orleans after Katrina, and I had spoken at the World War II Museum there. And then there's a dinner, and this man comes up to me with a box, and he said, "My father is sitting over there. He is a veteran, and he earned Purple Hearts." And he opens the box, and it is this pin with amethysts in it. And he said, "My father gave it to my mother on their 50th wedding anniversary, and she died as a result of Katrina. And we want you to have the pin." And I said, "I can't possibly take that pin." And they said, "No, you have to. It really meant a lot to her and to us, and she liked you." And so I have the pin, and both the objects, they're inanimate, but they really deliver a very strong message. And so inanimate objects can, in fact, have meaning.
Oh, absolutely. And as you say, it's fun to be able to predict what might be in the news cycle so that you have the appropriate pin to wear at the right moment. For me, it would be very hard to pick my favorites, but your story reminds me of one pin that I received from the executor of a fan after she had passed away. And the note that came with it was her request that I wear that pin when Donald Trump was gone. And it's it's a dangling watch. It looks like she might have been a nurse because it's the kind of thing nurses used to wear so they could see the time. And I wore it on Inauguration Day. Although I mentioned to you earlier, I did change pins in the middle of the inauguration when I saw Lady Gaga's eagle, which was so amazing. I switched to the largest eagle that I have in my collection. So
Well,
anyway,
I have sent Lady Gaga a copy of my book.
Oh, you definitely.
I did, and said she outdid us all on everything. So anyway.
That is amazing. How do you store your pins? Because
Well,
you've
first
now
of all,
given them.
the pins that have the foreign policy stories, had actually been circulating around the US going to presidential libraries. And I would go and explain the stories that went with them. And so the State Department has opened a diplomacy museum, and I'm going to give all those pins to them
Mm.
because they really do tell foreign policy stories. I have since then gotten what I call my pity pins. A lot of people have sent me pins because they feel sorry for me because I don't have the original ones, and I have a ton of them, and I hang them up in kind of, they look like, like little shoe bags, but just
Hmm.
little pockets. And when I was writing my pin book, originally, I put them all on the bed, and then I decided to organize them by species, and so I kind of try to do that. But I do have a lot of them, and they are fun. But it is a problem, definite problem, to figure out what to wear these days. So
Absolutely. In preparing for talking to you today, I spent a lot of time talking to Victor about what pin I should wear. And at one point, I had my dining room table covered with possibilities. My husband came in as I was moving them around. He said, "What game are you playing?" No, this is really important. I have to have the right pin for today. So, and I changed it literally at like 2 a.m. last night. I thought, no, I'm going to wear the one from Tiny Jewel Box because she mentions Tiny Jewel Box in her book.